Soaring Around the World is at best mediocre. As a spiritual successor and sequel to Soarin Over California, it lacks the basic fundamentals of a good theme park attraction, attempting to recapture the feelings and greatness of its predecessor without fully understanding what made the original so great. Although I wouldn't consider Soaring Around the World to be a bad attraction, I've always personally felt that there was something off with the updated version of the ride. It's taken me a while to understand as to why, but overall it boils down to 3 elements. The 3 things that separate the original Soaring Over California from the newer Soaring Around the World are storytelling, music, and intimacy. These 3 elements, while on the surface may seem expendable, are extremely important in a theme park attraction, and as you will see towards the end of the video, these are the factors that separate a decent theme park attraction from a great theme park attraction. With that being said, let's take an analytical look at both of these attractions and see just as to how the new Soaring Around the World is one of Disney's best downgrades they've ever done. Storytelling is one of the most important elements of any theme park attraction. It could transform a nearly 1-mile walk into a recently unearthed temple, a lump of painted cement into evidence of an active volcano, or even a nearly empty room into a heart-stopping escape from a First-Order Star Destroyer. Storytelling is the bread and butter of creating a great theme park attraction, and the original Soarin Over California was no exception. On the surface, that might sound a little weird. How can an attraction with guests sitting in front of a screen for 5 minutes have the same fundamentals of storytelling as other rides such as Indiana Jones Adventure or Rise of the Resistance? The truth is, storytelling in a theme park attraction is everywhere, even in places where we least expect them to be. Normally, we're used to seeing stories told to us directly through the use of practical elements, things like painted rocks, animatronics, and lighting, just to name a few. Since screen-based attractions like Soarin Over California or Soaring Around the World don't have the luxury of using practical elements, they instead have to rely on the art of filmmaking, more specifically, cinematography. Cinematography is the art and craft of telling a visual story through composition. Just like writing and acting, cinematography plays a huge role in setting the tone and feeling of the scene. For example, in Universal's Fast 5, where 2 cars are pulling a multi-ton safe through the city, cinematography helps the action feel more engaging and immersive. When shot casually from the rooftop on a wide-angle lens, the scene feels sluggish and almost anticlimactic. However, when using specific camera placements and a tighter point of view, that same scene quickly transforms into something exciting and action-packed. This concept in filmmaking also applies to screen-based attractions. The framing and movement of the camera, just like in film, can easily change what riders feel while on the ride. In Soaring Over California, guests are supposed to be flying over famous sites and locations on a hang glider. To convince guests that they're not on a giant metal machine in front of a screen, Imagineers used a variety of camera and ride vehicle movements to closely mimic the feel of gliding through the air. Just like a real-life hang glider, whenever the camera in Soaring Over California needs to go left or right, it slowly banks in one direction, lifting one side of the image up while putting the other side down. This extremely small but important detail is a form of cinematography. Without using any words or descriptions, the attraction is able to visually communicate to the guests that they are flying through the air on a hang glider. However, this is only one of the ways cinematography is used to tell a story in Soaring Over California. The other, and frankly more obvious example, is composition. Composition in cinematography is the framing and shooting of visual information to tell a story. A great example of this is the Salt Lake City ski resort scene. In the beginning, we see a massive snow-covered mountain across the entire screen. Then, as the camera slowly pans upwards, we get a glimpse of the peak in the far distance. As the camera attempts to climb up, it comes closer and closer to the mountain before finally at the last second, barely clearing the top of the peak. This scene is a perfect example of how to tell a story visually. In the beginning, it is almost impossible to see the top of the mountain until the camera starts to pan upwards. Not being able to see the peak of the mountain for the first second communicates to the guest the sheer size and scale. Scenes like this, where you hide certain elements from view, is, not surprisingly, one of the many techniques filmmakers have used in the past to make certain objects feel larger or bigger. As the camera starts climbing and coming closer and closer to the face of the mountain, it builds anticipation and excitement, visually communicating that the guest might not be able to clear the top of the peak in time. That feeling builds and builds up until the guests barely clear the top of the mountain and breathe a sigh of relief as they are greeted by a bird's eye view of the surrounding area, encompassing the sheer height and scale of the mountain. All of these visual cues coming together is one of the reasons why most guests, even those who have ridden the attraction multiple times, still have the knee-jerk reaction to raise their feet out of their way. This level of storytelling is found in almost every scene in Soarin Over California. So with that being said, how does the newer Soarin Around the World compare? At first glance, Soarin Around the World looks like a massive upgrade compared to the previous Soarin Over California. The image quality is much higher, the CGI, while a bit overused at times, is a massive improvement, especially compared to the PS2 level graphics with the hang glider, and overall there are many more impressive locations to see and experience. Visually speaking, the attraction is much better off compared to its predecessor. However, from a storytelling, or more specifically, cinematography point of view, Soarin Around the World is extremely lacking. Instead of using camera movements to show off how a river winds its way through the land, the sheer height and scale of a massive mountain, or showcasing the seemingly endless rows of vineyards in Napa Valley, Soarin Around the World does mostly nothing. In the opening scene of the attraction, guests find themselves flying over the Swiss Alps towards the Matterhorn. Instead of starting closer to the bottom and climbing upwards to emphasize the size and scale like in Soarin Over California, the camera is instead positioned very high up and simply flies in a straight line over the top of the peak. Even though the Matterhorn is thousands of feet taller than any other mountain in Salt Lake City, this lackluster cinematography fails to leave an impact, making the otherwise majestic Matterhorn mountain feel small and underwhelming. Believe it or not, this problem affects the entire attraction. Rather than trying to tell a story, Soarin Around the World uses cinematography like flying in a straight line, flying in a straight line, flying in a straight line, and then somehow pivoting in the air despite the fact that you're supposed to be on a hang glider, flying in a straight line, mostly flying in a straight line, 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 and last but definitely not least, flying in a straight line. Although there are some scenes in Soarin Around the World that do have unique camera movements, compared to its predecessor, most of the attraction's cinematography is unfortunately bland, uncreative, or extremely repetitive. However, this isn't the only thing Soarin Around the World fails to do correctly. The second thing Soarin Around the World does substantially worse than Soarin Over California is the music. Similar to cinematography, music is also used to tell a story. Whether it be the heart-stopping moment of having to cross a rickety bridge, the futile escape from an evil space ghost, or whatever this is supposed to be. Music plays a huge role in telling the audience what to feel in a certain scenario. It can very easily make, or in some cases, even break an experience. In Soarin Over California, music is used in conjunction with cinematography throughout the entire experience to help tell a story. As guests fly over the river, the music is soft and calming, filling guests with a sense of calmness and relaxation. In the desert, the music is fast and quick, capturing the speed and excitement of the scene. However, at Yosemite, the music is slow but grand, encapsulating the majestic nature of the landscape. Similar to Soaring Over California, Soaring Around the World also uses music in conjunction with cinematography to help tell a story. As guests fly over the Great Wall of China, the music is soft and calming. At the Great Pyramids in Egypt, the music is fast and quick. Then in Utah, the music is slow but grand. As you might have noticed, despite these two attractions doing basically the same thing, Soaring Around the World's presentation and music somehow feel more empty compared to Soaring Over California. Many people point their fingers toward Jerry Goldsmith. Jerry Goldsmith was a world-famous composer known for his work in 1979's Alien, the original Mulan, Star Trek, and many others, including the entire score for Soaring Over California. However, while it is true that Jerry Goldsmith's work in Soaring Over California was superb, I personally believe the issue with Soaring Around the World's music goes much deeper than that. In the original Soaring Over California, music is used to elevate what's being seen on screen. When guests are climbing up and coming closer and closer into slamming into the side of a mountain at Lake Tahoe, the music matches up with the feeling and builds upon it. In stark contrast, Soaring Around the World uses music to tell guests where they are. Nearly every country the guests travel to has a set of different and unique instruments playing from that specific location. For example, in Fiji, the soundtrack is made up of various instruments from the Pacific Islands. Rather than making guests feel excited, relaxed, or impressed, it instead tells them that they're in Fiji. At the Taj Mahal, the music is more Indian-inspired. Then, in Africa, the music is more based in African instruments. Whereas Soaring Around the World uses music to tell guests something, more specifically where they are, Soaring Over California uses music to make scenes feel fast, slow, impressive, and sometimes even patriotic. While the visuals for each scene are different, most of the scenes in Soaring Around the World feel basically the same. None of the scenes in the attraction have their own personality or unique feel to them. None of them except for the final scenes, which, unsurprisingly, is very similar to the original Soaring Over California. Although music in itself is very subjective, it is very hard to deny the fact that Soaring Around the World's soundtrack lacks the original feel from its predecessor. While the attraction does try to make its musical score stand out with more unique musical instruments per location, its lack of personality and seemingly bland presentation fails to match any highs and lows of the original Soaring Over California. The last and by far biggest downgrade done in Soaring Around the World is intimacy. Now, I will say that intimacy is a very strange way to describe things, but it's by far the best word I can use in this scenario. Intimacy in a theme park is similar to immersion in that it helps build the believability of an attraction or land. However, unlike immersion, which is more based on what we see, intimacy is based more on what we feel. The best way I can really explain this is by comparing Disney's Star Wars Galaxy's Edge to Universal Studios' Super Nintendo World. In terms of immersion, without a doubt, Star Wars Galaxy's Edge is the superior land. Galaxy's Edge takes sightlines very seriously, using trees and various structures to obscure the guest's view. Guests would not only find it difficult to see outside of the land, but will also find it very hard to see animatronic wiring, lighting effects, or any other behind-the-scene elements. Even structures like Big Thunder Mountain Railroad, which can be seen from inside of the land, are blended into the environment seamlessly. Super Nintendo World, on the other hand, doesn't really seem to care at all about sightlines. In Universal Studios Japan, the Forbidden Journey attraction in the Wizarding World of Harry Potter can easily be seen from inside of the land. Then, in Universal Studios Hollywood, almost the entire lower level of the park can be seen from the second story of the land. Multiple animatronic support structures and wiring can also be seen from eye level. And lastly, the entire backdrop for Super Nintendo World is made up of multiple sections of metal instead of being made of one piece, making the backdrop look more like a jigsaw puzzle. By that logic, Super Nintendo World is much less immersive than Galaxy's Edge, so it must be substantially worse, right? Well, not exactly. Despite having worse sightlines than Galaxy's Edge, Super Nintendo World, as many people including myself would describe it, feels alive. The various interactive games, animatronics, and effects all throughout the land makes the area feel more expansive and realistic. Even though Galaxy's Edge is much more immersive, the lack of movement and stiffness throughout the land makes it feel more like an abandoned movie set rather than an alien planet. Everything in the land looks real, but nothing in the land really feels real. This feeling is what I would describe as intimacy, and it's the number one thing that separates the original Soarin Over California from Soarin Around the World. One very unique feature in Soarin Over California is the attraction's profound focus on intimate connections between people and the landscape. Every scene and location in the ride has some sort of interaction between individuals and the surroundings. This may seem pointless at first, but it's easily one of the most important aspects of Soarin Over California. Hearing and seeing people in almost any scenario creates a sense of familiarity and belonging. This is mainly due to human psychology. Humans over the years have evolved to seek out group affiliation and social interaction, since those are the traits that benefit the best for survival and self-well-being. Because of this, many people today have a natural urge to find and feel more comfortable around other groups of people. Soarin Over California, through its portrayal of people interacting with the landscape, taps into this human psychology. Whether it's the sounds of people gracefully kayaking down a river, or the exhilarating sight of rock climbers and hang gliders scaling Yosemite, every scene in Soarin Over California provides a sense of human connection, making riders feel like they're actually experiencing these locations in real life. In other words, by actively showing people engaging with their surroundings, it makes you feel like you've already embarked on these adventures previously, fostering a deeper connection and feeling of being part of a larger community. This is one of the biggest reasons why so many people say Soarin Over California feels so real and alive, while Soarin Around the World feels more like a YouTube video. The sights and sounds of people interacting makes a humongous difference in the intimacy of the attraction, and also happens to be one of the things Soarin Around the World desperately lacks in. While we do see people from time to time, most of the time they aren't interacting with the land, nor are they making any sounds. For example, in Sydney Harbor, there are multiple boats crossing the water as the guests fly towards the Sydney Harbor Bridge. While the boats are very obviously controlled by people, the people in said boats make no noise at all. No shouting, no excitement, and definitely no emotion. The beach scene in Soarin Over California, on the other hand, is completely different. Whereas in Sydney, there are no sounds or emotions coming from the boats, At the beach, people can both be seen and heard cheerfully playing in the water as the guests fly over. This feeling of intimacy and closeness you get from the beach is completely lost in the Sydney scene. Most scenes in Soaring Around the World unfortunately have this problem. At the Taj Mahal and Great Wall of China, people can be seen walking along the pathways. However, just like most scenes in the attraction, the people make no noise, nor do they really interact with the landscape. The lack of sounds and interactions with the land make the scenes feel empty and distant. In the original version of the ride, people's connection with the landscape was at the center of the entire experience. The subtle connection found in almost every scene was completely lost during the production of Soaring Around the World. While Soaring Over California feels like you're flying over real places in California on a hang glider, Soaring Around the World feels more like you're watching a YouTube video of drone shots on a massive screen. Though the ride does have a lot of issues, I don't necessarily think Soaring Around the World is a bad attraction. It doesn't try to piggyback off of the original ride, creating its own identity while showcasing beautiful places around the world that many people only wish to see in their lifetimes. However, this does not excuse the attraction from deviating off from the original intent of the experience. The lack of creative cinematography, like banking the camera left or right to simulate the turning of a hang glider, as well as a underwhelming musical score, combined with the soulless presentation of people throughout the attraction, makes Soaring Around the World feel so much worse than Soaring Over California. If the ride had followed in the footsteps of its predecessor while also maintaining its current identity, it could have very well been one of Disney's greatest theme park upgrades. If you have any thoughts or opinions on whether or not Soaring Around the World is a good upgrade to Soaring Over California, please leave a comment down below. I'm interested in hearing other people's perspective on the subject. If you like this sort of content and want to see more, you can help me and the channel out by leaving a like, sharing the video, as well as subscribing to the channel and clicking the bell icon to get notified when new videos come out.